this is a very controversial take, but I'll let you know. One of the things that bothers me the most about white culture, to the extent that such a thing exists, and that's not me being shady, it's just like white isn't actually a race. Like, it's really only exists in this country.
Is black?
No, not really. Not really. I suppose you could say, like, now it is because of black Americans, but we often use black to extend beyond America, so, like, no, not really. It's a social contract.
We'd also have to define what white is and what black is in terms of, well, which countries or what shade.
Yeah. Those things really only make sense in this country. So anyway, I say all that to say, like, I'm not taking a shot by saying white culture, whatever that means. It's just... So... But one of the issues I have about white culture is there's often this undercurrent of arrogance. And to walk away from an interview and to say, like, I didn't get this job because I'm white and they want to hire some diversity hire, the arrogance it takes to not pause and think, maybe they were more qualified than me, is appalling. And upsetting to me.
Well, I mean, wouldn't the removal of all this policy for diversity and equal opportunity, removing that, put everyone on the level playing field so that a white person could categorically say, oh, I was just less qualified than my brown brethren?
I mean,
like, doesn't the removal of forcing companies to adhere to that enable a more merit-based approach?
No, I don't think so. I mean, then this is just me speaking personally now. Like, okay. I personally think that for the foreseeable future, even as many of these policies are being rolled back, there will be a belief that diversity hires, quote unquote, still continue. So no, I don't think so. Now, if you do roll all this stuff back, I think, like, frankly, the result that you'll get is a rollback in time to the same discriminatory practices that this country upheld for so long. There's a great book, The Economics of Race.
The Economics of Race. By who?
I'm sorry, I can't remember his name. But he does a lot of these books. The Economics of, and then something random. And in fact, I think it's The Economics of Racism, now that I think about it. But anyway, the central thesis of this book is that employers actually have a preference for people who look like them or remind them of themselves. Right, and I use the term preference specifically because
like nepotism, almost.
Yeah, sort of like nepotism, but in economics, like taste and preference, like that's like a sort of an economic term, and we can quantify that, right? The idea is that, like, there's actually utility in hiring someone to work with me who reminds me of myself. And in the context of this conversation, if that theory is correct, which I think history would suggest it was, you can easily see, like, white employers hiring white employees and giving them a bump just because they are white, right? So if I have a slightly more qualified black applicant and a slightly underqualified white applicant, my preference for working with someone who reminds me of myself, like, I actually find utility in that, and therefore they sort of get a few extra points.
Does that play to, I'm just curious, what is the, and I don't want to get too far off track, but I'm just curious, maybe as an asterisk, what is the difference between tribalism and racism? Because tribalism seems to be, I would wonder, is taking care of your tribe and associating or socializing with someone who is like, right? And engaging that and encouraging that likeness so that your tribe is sustained. Mm-hmm. But this conversation seems to be about race, and I'm wondering, is that another synonym? race and tribe?
Yeah, I think, is it a synonym? I'm not sure if it's a synonym, but I think about tribalism as sort of this like kind of umbrella term, and I do think racism fits under it.
Okay.
Right?
Okay. So there's an overarching...
I think so, yeah.
And a couple things can fit under
that.
Race could be one of them.
I think so. And so, yeah, I see tribalism and racism as like very, very similar. If your question is to suggest that like tribalism is fine or right, I won't necessarily push you on that. I would just say, okay.
I wouldn't say fine or right. The reason I brought it up was because I wonder what our biological nature is in order for survival. Mm-hmm. So we are in kind of more softer, posh places these days. Even the setting of this conversation, we're not exactly in any kind of harm or danger, right? We're well accounted for and established and taken care of. There is not a wilderness that we need to worry about, and there's an abundance of food. Mm-hmm. But back to a time when there was wilderness and a lack of food, unless we went out and found it, we gathered as communities. Mm-hmm. And those communities were at least like-minded, but usually they were based on family, built out villages, and they would take care of their own, and they would sustain that. And that became a biological need, and that perpetuated throughout generations of humans. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So now, I'm not so sure that we would, and this is just my personal opinion, I'm not so sure that we would be able to shed that like cold turkey and not be of tribal mind. Mm-hmm. So then I'm just curious, is that the centuries and centuries and centuries of tribalism that we needed for survival at play for that higher scenario that you talked about? This person reminds me of me. Mm-hmm. This person looks like me. Yeah. That type of thing.
I'd say I think most certainly it is, and I agree with you. Like I don't know that we'll ever be able to shed that because it's kind of so deep in the DNA of being like a Homo sapien.
Have we integrated race into that survival?
Yes, I think so. Now, like I said, I don't think we can shed it, at least not very easily. But, and this is apropos since we're talking about Rousseau, who's obviously a scholar on governance. To me, this now becomes a question of governance. If you cannot reasonably expect the individuals who you govern to shed their tribalist instincts, you have to decide, is that something that you want in your society? In this country, we have decided no. Right? We pride ourselves on being a melting pot.
Can you define we so I know who is the speaker in terms of we are a melting pot? Like, who is the one that's perpetuating that message when you say we?
Almost every iteration of the national government, even at times where like slavery was rampant and we were killing off natives, but we still espoused these ideas, right? It's a shame that I cannot quote this, but at the base of the Statue of Liberty, right? Like, give me your poor, your broken, your castaways. So, in this country, we have said, no, actually, we don't want tribalist instincts pervasive through our society. If anything, we want, an American tribe, right? We are all Americans. That is the one big tribe. So that's what we say that we want to be.
And this is American in terms of the United States, even though the Americas are in the South, they're in the Central, or North.
Sure.
So we're talking.
I'm talking the United States of
United
America.
States
yes.
America.
Yes.
Okay.
That is what we have espoused. Now you have a governance problem because you, as the governing body, have said I want to be not tribalist, even as I recognize it's very hard, if not impossible, for the people I govern to shed their tribalist instincts. So now you need to govern them. All right. Now you have to set rules and policies and procedures that either stifle the ability or the desire to be tribalist.
stifle tribalism.
Yes.
Well, it's interesting because, and this is why I was trying to piece this together, and I was asking you to define the we. Is the we sounds like a tribe. The we sounds like the mission statement of a group that says we identify as this. Mm-hmm. So how can, on one hand, we espouse the verb that you use, tribalism, but then denounce tribalism with the other hand?
Well, I think it's that we want one big United States of America tribe.
Okay.
It's not...
It's a big tribe.
We don't want sort of like internal divisions within the tribe. At least we say.
Okay.
And even our current federal government, which has said and done things that...
As of February 2025.
Yes, that has said and done things that would appear to stoke those internal divisions. Like, even under this government, we have still continued to say, like, the justification for rolling back many of these equal employment opportunity programs, diversity and inclusion programs, is that they encourage racism and we don't want racism. That they encourage divisions and we don't want divisions. That was the justification.
Okay.
So we have, like, always actually said that, like, we do not want internal tribalism. If there will be tribalism, let us all be one big United States of America tribe.
That's interesting. And the reason why it's interesting is I go back to some of our earlier documents. If you look at Bill of Rights, you look at the Constitution, and can you comment on some of the amendments in the Bill of Rights and the definition of what it means to be a citizen?
Sure. I mean, I think the most important one is, like, one of the first lines, right? That all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with unalienable rights.
Okay. And then were there any caveats to that?
I know what you're getting at.
Well, no, I'm not getting at anything, but I want to make sure that we're covering our bases when we talk about we.
Sure. So the big caveat is that enslaved people were counted as 3/5, right? 3/5 of a person, which is exceptionally offensive and seems deeply contradictory to the idea that all men are created equal. Now, of course, it ought to be remembered, as far as historical context is concerned, that compromise was introduced to keep the South from seceding, right? Like, that was the only way to keep the southern states on board with creating a unified nation. Obviously, they later go on to secede anyway, but... So anyway, the original intent was not to literally say that, like, you know, black Americans are worth 60% of white Americans. It was... It's an electoral tactic. It's a voting tactic. Because obviously the southern states wanted to be able to count black people in their population. Which, by the way, the great irony is that if the South had their way, actually enslaved people would count 1 for 1. Because they want their population to be larger, because they want a larger presence in the Electoral College. Nice, we're getting back to all of it, right? So that's sort of the irony of this, is like the South would have said, like, no, count them 1 to 1. And of course the North would have them counted as 0 if it was up to them, because they can't vote anyway. So you're just juicing your population numbers.
Sure.
Anyway, so yes, that is the big caveat. Obviously, history looks extremely unfavorably up on that.
Well, I'm curious in terms of, because we've marked this as February 2025, and here we have, I don't know if it's a new issue, but it's definitely a new hot topic, which is, as you laid out with the Statue of Liberty, is the topic of immigrants.